What happens when a beloved television icon finds himself in the middle of a conversation that spirals completely out of control? What happens when years of pent-up frustration about Hollywood politics and cancel culture finally explode on live television? Christopher Meloni, the man who brought Detective Elliot Stabler to life for over a decade, walked off Kelly Clarkson's daytime talk show after what can only be described as one of the most intense confrontations ever captured on daytime television. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. And by the end, studio audience members were gasping audibly as security had to step in. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how quickly things can deteriorate when two strong personalities clash over some of the most controversial topics in entertainment today. If you want to see more breakdowns of explosive celebrity moments like this, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments what other celebrity confrontations you'd like me to cover next. Now let's dive into exactly what happened when Christopher Meloni sat down with Kelly Clarkson for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview. The Kelly Clarkson Show had been riding high on positive reviews and strong ratings, with Kelly's warm, relatable interviewing style making celebrities feel comfortable enough to open up about their personal lives and careers. The show's producers had booked Christopher Meloni to discuss his return to the Law and Order franchise with organized crime, a topic that should have been safe territory for a seasoned actor promoting his latest project. The interview started normally enough, with Kelly's signature bright smile and enthusiastic energy as she introduced her guest. "We're here with Christopher Meloni, and I have to tell you, I am such a huge fan of your work," Kelly began, her voice carrying that familiar warmth that had made her show so successful. "Law & Order SVU was appointment television in my house for years, and now you're back with organized crime. How does it feel to be stepping back into that world?" Christopher settled into his chair, appearing relaxed and ready to discuss his career. "It feels incredible, Kelly. You know, playing Elliot Stabler was such a defining part of my life for 12 years. When I left SVU, I thought that chapter was closed forever. But when Dick Wolf approached me about this new show, about exploring what Stabler would be like after all these years, I couldn't resist. And the fans have been going absolutely crazy," Kelly responded, leaning forward with genuine interest. "I mean, the social media reaction when they announced your return was insane. Did you expect that level of excitement?" "The fan response has been overwhelming in the best possible way," Christopher replied, his trademark intensity already beginning to show through his calm demeanor. "These characters, these stories, they matter to people. They see themselves in these struggles, in these fights for justice. It's not just entertainment, it's about something bigger." Kelly nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly what I love about procedural dramas. They tackle real issues, real problems that people are dealing with every day. And your character, Stabler, he's always been someone who fights for the victims. Someone who doesn't back down from the hard fights." "That's right," Christopher said, his voice gaining strength. "Stabler has always been about justice, about protecting people who can't protect themselves. He's not perfect, he makes mistakes, but his heart is always in the right place. He's willing to cross lines that others won't cross to get to the truth." This seemed like the perfect setup for Kelly to transition into talking about the show's impact on social issues. But instead, she decided to take the conversation in a different direction. "Speaking of crossing lines, I have to ask you about something that's been making headlines lately. There's been a lot of discussion in Hollywood about accountability and making sure that entertainment reflects the values we want to see in society." Christopher's expression shifted slightly, a wariness creeping into his eyes. "What do you mean specifically?" "Well, there's been some criticism about shows like Law & Order and how they portray law enforcement, especially in light of everything that's happened in the past few years with police reform and social justice movements. Some people are saying that these shows might be contributing to a problematic view of policing. What's your response to that?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and viewers could see Christopher processing what he'd just been asked. This wasn't the promotional softball interview he'd been expecting. This was Kelly Clarkson, America's sweetheart, asking him to defend his life's work against accusations of social irresponsibility. "I think that's a very complex issue," Christopher began carefully. "These shows have always tried to present law enforcement in a nuanced way. We show good cops and bad cops. We show the system working and the system failing. The goal has always been to tell honest stories about the challenges facing both law enforcement and the communities they serve." Kelly pressed further. "But don't you think there's a responsibility that comes with portraying police officers as heroes, week after week, especially when we know that there are serious problems with police brutality and systemic racism in law enforcement?" Christopher's jaw tightened slightly. "Kelly, I think you're oversimplifying what these shows actually do. We've tackled police corruption. We've shown officers making terrible mistakes. We've explored the impact of trauma on both cops and victims. These aren't propaganda pieces. They're stories about human beings trying to do difficult jobs in an imperfect system. But at the end of the day, the cops are usually the good guys who save the day, right? Kelly continued. And some critics are saying that this kind of storytelling makes it harder for people to see the real problems in policing, because they're used to seeing officers as heroic figures on television. The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. Christopher leaned back in his chair, his famous intensity now fully activated. So, what are you suggesting, Kelly? That we should stop telling stories about people who dedicate their lives to protecting others? That we should pretend that there aren't men and women in law enforcement who genuinely care about justice? I'm not suggesting that at all, Kelly replied, but her tone had shifted from warm and conversational to more challenging. I'm just asking if you think there's a responsibility to be more critical, more aware of how these portrayals might affect public perception of policing. And I'm telling you that these shows have been critical. They have been aware. Christopher shot back, his voice rising slightly. We've never shied away from showing the dark side of law enforcement. But we've also shown the reality that most cops are decent people trying to do a difficult job. Should we ignore that reality to satisfy some political agenda? The word political seemed to electrify the air in the studio. Kelly's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. I don't think wanting accountability in law enforcement is a political agenda, Christopher. I think it's about justice and equality. And I think using entertainment as a weapon in political battles is dangerous. Christopher responded immediately. When you start demanding that art serve ideology instead of truth, you're walking down a very dark path. This was no longer a promotional interview. This was a debate, and both participants were digging in for a fight. The studio audience, who had come expecting Kelly's usual light-hearted celebrity chat, were witnessing something unprecedented. Christopher Meloni and Kelly Clarkson were about to engage in a battle that would define not just this interview, but potentially both of their careers. Kelly's eyes flashed with something that viewers had never seen before on her usually upbeat show. Christopher, I think you're misunderstanding what I'm trying to say here. Nobody's asking you to serve an ideology. We're asking you to be responsible about the impact your work has on society. Responsible? Christopher's voice carried an edge of disbelief. Kelly, I've been responsible my entire career. I've portrayed complex characters dealing with real issues. I've never glorified violence or corruption. But now you're sitting here telling me that showing dedicated police officers is somehow harmful to society. I'm not saying that, Kelly replied, but her tone suggested she was standing her ground. What I'm saying is that in today's climate, maybe we need to think more carefully about how we present law enforcement to the public. Maybe we need to show more of the problems, more of the systemic issues that communities of color face. Christopher sat forward in his chair, his intensity now fully unleashed. You want to know what's irresponsible, Kelly? What's irresponsible is suggesting that storytellers should ignore half the truth to make a political point. Should we pretend that there aren't cops who run toward danger while everyone else runs away? Should we pretend that there aren't officers who've dedicated their lives to protecting the most vulnerable people in our society? Of course not, Kelly shot back. But we also can't pretend that there isn't a serious problem with how policing works in this country. We can't ignore the voices of people who have been harmed by police violence. And we haven't ignored those voices, Christopher responded immediately. Law and Order has tackled police brutality, racial profiling, corruption, cover-ups. We've shown the system failing people over and over again, but we've also shown it working, because sometimes it does work. Sometimes justice is served. Sometimes the good guys win, and apparently, that's now considered problematic. The studio audience was completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something far more intense than anything they'd expected. Kelly's usual warm demeanor had been replaced by something much more confrontational. Christopher, I think you're being defensive about legitimate criticism, Kelly continued. When activists and community leaders say that these shows contribute to a culture that makes it harder to hold police accountable, maybe we should listen to them instead of dismissing their concerns. I'm not dismissing anyone's concerns, Christopher replied, his voice getting louder. But I'm also not going to apologize for spending my career telling stories about people who put their lives on the line every day. I'm not going to pretend that all cops are villains just because it's fashionable to do so right now. Nobody's asking you to pretend all cops are villains, Kelly said, her own voice rising to match his energy. But maybe you could acknowledge that the hero cop narrative has real-world consequences. Maybe you could admit that these shows have contributed to a culture where people automatically trust police officers even when they shouldn't. Christopher's face was flushed now, his famous intensity reaching levels that his SVU co-stars would have recognized. So now I'm responsible for people's political opinions. I'm responsible for how they view law enforcement. Kelly, I'm an actor. I tell stories. I don't indoctrinate people, but stories have power. Christopher, Kelly pressed on. They shape how people see the world. And when you spend 20 years telling stories where the cops are usually right, and the system usually works, that has an impact on how people think about real-world policing. You know what has an impact on how people think about policing? Christopher shot back. Crime. Victims. People who have been helped by good cops and hurt by bad ones. Real life has an impact on how people think about policing, not television shows. That's incredibly naive, Kelly responded, and the word naive seemed to hit Christopher like a physical blow. You're telling me that decades of television programming showing police officers as heroes doesn't influence public opinion. You're telling me that entertainment has no impact on how people see the world. I'm telling you that I'm not going to take responsibility for society's problems, Christopher said, his voice now carrying a dangerous edge. I'm not going to be lectured by someone who built her career on feel-good entertainment about the supposed harm I've caused by portraying dedicated law enforcement officers. The personal attack landed hard, and Kelly's expression changed completely. Excuse me, feel-good entertainment. Christopher, I think you're forgetting where you are right now. This is my show, and I'm asking you reasonable questions about important issues. Reasonable questions. Christopher laughed, but there was no humor in it. Kelly, you ambushed me. I came here to talk about my show, about my character, about returning to work I loved. Instead, you're putting me on trial for the crime of portraying police officers as human beings instead of monsters. I didn't ambush you, Kelly replied, coldly. I asked you about criticism that your work has received. That's what journalists do, that's what interviewers do. If you can't handle discussing the impact of your work, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. The challenge was unmistakable, and Christopher's response was immediate and fierce. Don't lecture me about interviews. Kelly, I've been doing this longer than you've been in the business. I've faced real journalists asking real questions, not talk show hosts trying to score political points. Political points. Kelly's voice was sharp now. Christopher, caring about social justice isn't about scoring political points. It's about doing what's right. It's about using the platform we have to make positive changes in the world. And what makes you think that 20 years of law and order hasn't made positive changes in the world? Christopher demanded. What makes you think that showing people fighting for justice, standing up for victims, refusing to give up on difficult cases, hasn't inspired people to care more about these issues? Because the real world doesn't work like your TV show, Kelly replied bluntly. In the real world, cases don't get solved in an hour. In the real world, the justice system fails people every day. In the real world, police officers sometimes are the problem, not the solution. Christopher stared at her for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed what she'd just said. Kelly, I've worked with real cops, real detectives, real prosecutors. I've seen their dedication, their commitment to justice. I've seen them work cases that haunted them for years. I've seen them fight for victims when everyone else had given up. And you're sitting here telling me that none of that matters because it doesn't fit your political narrative. It's not a political narrative, Kelly insisted. It's reality. And maybe if you spent less time in Hollywood and more time in the real world, you'd understand that. The insult hung in the air like a physical presence. Christopher's eyes narrowed, and when he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. Less time in Hollywood. Kelly, I've spent my entire career trying to tell honest stories about real issues. I've researched every role, worked with real law enforcement, talked to real victims. What have you done besides sing songs and host talk shows? Kelly's face went pale, then flushed red. How dare you minimize my career? How dare you suggest that I don't understand real issues? I've used my platform to support causes I believe in, to shine light on important problems, to help people who need help. By attacking the work of people who've dedicated their lives to the same causes, Christopher shot back. By tearing down stories that have inspired millions of people to care about justice, by asking hard questions about the impact of entertainment on society, Kelly replied firmly. By refusing to let celebrities hide behind their art when that art has real-world consequences. Christopher stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. You know what, Kelly? I came here in good faith to talk about my work, to connect with fans who love these characters and these stories. Instead, you've turned this into some kind of political inquisition where I'm supposed to apologize for my life's work. Sit down, Christopher, Kelly said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. We're not finished here. Oh, we're finished, Christopher replied, his voice carrying a finality that made the studio audience gasp. We're absolutely finished. The studio fell into complete silence as Christopher remained standing, his hands clenched at his sides. Kelly looked up at him from her chair, clearly not expecting him to actually follow through on his threat to end the interview. Christopher, please sit down, Kelly said, her voice now carrying a mix of authority and uncertainty. We can discuss this like adults. We don't have to agree on everything. Adults. Christopher's laugh was bitter. Kelly, adults don't ambush their guests with political attacks disguised as interviews. Adults don't use their platform to tear down other people's life work to make themselves look enlightened. I wasn't attacking your life work, Kelly protested, but her voice lacked conviction. I was asking legitimate questions about the impact of entertainment on society. That's what responsible interviewers do. Responsible interviewers. Christopher's voice rose again. Kelly, responsible interviewers don't trap their guests. They don't pretend to be interested in someone's career just so they can lecture them about social justice. You brought me here under false pretenses. Kelly stood up now too, facing him across the small space between their chairs. False pretenses. Christopher, these are issues that matter. These are conversations that need to happen. Just because you're uncomfortable doesn't mean we shouldn't have them. I'm not uncomfortable with difficult conversations. Christopher shot back. I'm uncomfortable with dishonest ones. You didn't want to have a conversation, Kelly. You wanted to make a statement. You wanted to use me as a prop in your political theater. Political theater. Kelly's voice was getting shrill now. Christopher, caring about social justice isn't political theater. Asking tough questions isn't political theater. Maybe you're just not used to being challenged. Not used to being challenged. Christopher took a step closer, his intensity now at dangerous levels. Kelly, I've been challenged by real journalists, real critics, real people who actually understand the work I do. I've never been challenged by someone who clearly did no research and has no understanding of what she's talking about. No understanding. Kelly's face was red now, her carefully maintained composure completely gone. Christopher, I understand perfectly well. I understand that you've spent your career making millions of dollars portraying a fantasy version of law enforcement that doesn't exist in the real world. A fantasy version. Christopher's voice was incredulous. Kelly, I've portrayed a man who's been traumatized by his job, who's made terrible mistakes, who struggled with anger and violence. I've shown the cost of this work on families, on relationships, on mental health. How is that fantasy? Because at the end of the day, your character is still the hero. Kelly replied, at the end of the day, the system works, justice is served, and the good guys win. That's not reality for millions of people in this country. And what would you have me do? Christopher demanded. Should I only tell stories where the system fails? Should I only show corruption and brutality? Should I ignore the fact that sometimes, just sometimes, justice actually is served? You should show the whole truth, Kelly said firmly, not just the parts that make law enforcement look good. I have shown the whole truth, Christopher replied, his voice now carrying a dangerous edge. But you wouldn't know that because you haven't actually watched the work you're criticizing. You've just read whatever talking points someone gave. You two make yourself look socially conscious. The accusation hung in the air like a bomb. Kelly's face went white, then red again. How dare you suggest that I don't know what I'm talking about? How dare you suggest that my concerns about social justice are just talking points? Then prove me wrong, Christopher challenged. Tell me about specific episodes where you think we got it wrong. Tell me about specific storylines that you think were harmful. Give me something concrete instead of these vague accusations about contributing to problems. Kelly opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly struggling for a response. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity as the studio audience watched this real-time battle of wills. I don't need to prove anything to you, Kelly finally said, but her voice lacked its earlier fire. The criticism speaks for itself. The impact speaks for itself. The criticism speaks for itself. Christopher's voice was filled with disdain. Kelly, you can't even name one specific example of the harm you're accusing me of causing. You're just repeating generic talking points about police procedurals without any understanding of what you're actually talking about. I understand. Enough, Kelly replied, but she sounded defensive now. I understand that representation matters. I understand that when you show the same types of stories over and over again, it shapes how people think about the world. And I understand that when talk show hosts try to become political commentators without doing their homework, it's embarrassing for everyone involved. Christopher shot back. The personal attack landed hard, and Kelly's composure finally cracked. Completely. Get out, she said, her voice shaking with anger. Get out of my studio right now. Gladly, Christopher replied, already moving toward the edge of the set. This has been one of the most unprofessional interviews I've ever experienced. Unprofessional. Kelly's voice followed him as he walked away. Christopher, you're the one who's being unprofessional. You're the one who can't handle being asked hard questions about your work. Christopher stopped and turned back to face her one last time. Kelly, I can handle hard questions. What I can't handle is being ambushed by someone who's more interested in virtue signaling than actually understanding the work they're criticizing. Don't you dare accuse me of virtue signaling, Kelly replied, her voice rising to match his. Don't you dare suggest that I don't care about these issues. Then maybe next time do your homework before you try to tear down someone's life work. Christopher said, his voice carrying a finality that made it clear he was done with this conversation. As he walked off the set, the studio audience sat in stunned silence. Some were applauding, others were booing, and many were simply staring in shock at what they'd just witnessed. Kelly stood alone on her set, her face flushed and her hands shaking slightly. We'll be right back, she said to the cameras, her voice barely controlled. But everyone knew that there would be no coming back from this. The interview had ended, not with the usual pleasantries and promotion, but with one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history. The producers scrambled to cut to commercial as Christopher disappeared through the studio doors, leaving behind a show in chaos and a host who had clearly bitten off more than she could chew. The carefully orchestrated world of daytime television had been shattered by a clash between two strong personalities who had fundamentally different views of art, politics, and responsibility. As the cameras stopped rolling, the studio audience buzzed with excitement and confusion. They had come expecting Kelly's usual warm, fuzzy celebrity interview, but instead they had witnessed something unprecedented, something that would be talked about for years to come. What started as a simple promotional interview had become a microcosm of larger cultural battles about art, politics, and the responsibility of entertainers to society. Both participants had revealed sides of themselves that their audiences had never seen before, and neither had emerged unscathed from the encounter. The confrontation between Christopher Meloni and Kelly Clarkson had become more than just a failed interview. It had become a symbol of the deep divisions in American culture, a reminder that even the most seemingly innocent conversations can explode into something much larger and more significant. And as Christopher walked out of that studio, he left behind not just an unfinished interview, but a moment that would define both of their careers in ways neither of them could have anticipated. If you enjoyed this breakdown of one of the most explosive celebrity confrontations in recent memory, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that shocked the entertainment world. And let me know in the comments, do you think Christopher was right to walk out, or should he have stayed and finished the interview? What other celebrity walk-offs would you like to see me cover next?